So looks like we're live. Let me double check my settings and make sure that everything is on the up and up. Okay, looks like I got a mic and a camera. Let's do this thing. So completely against my better judgment, I am hopping on the Blurting While Dad live stream. I've been playing around the platform or whatnot, and completely against my better judgment, we're going to get back into some political stuff. I used to talk about it all the time on my podcast, and then the death threat started rolling in, and so I kind of chilled. But we're back now. And so on this episode of this inconsistent episode of Blurting While Dad, we're going to talk about how essentially right now we seem to be in a place where our rights are kind of being beta tested. So that's what we have on today's episode. I'm gonna jump into this. Like I said, this is against my better judgment. So we'll see how this thing goes. Talk to y'all after the intro. Peace. Okay. And I know I feel like I'm repeating myself on this one, but I do need to say, I need to preface what I'm about to say by this. This is against my better judgment, but I cannot not speak on this. And against my better judgment, I am kind of making um the podcast political again. Last time I did this was around 2016, 2015, 2016, all the way up through 2018. Um, and when I delved into the political side of being of my nerdum, which is I'm a political nerd, news nerd, and stuff like that. That's when weird threats and all kinds of other stuff started pouring into my inbox. So this is me kind of stepping back and embracing what I kind of wanted Blurting While Dad, Long Boxing While Black to be. A mix of current events and pop culture, comic books, the whole nine. And today we in current events. So if this don't resonate with you, don't connect with you, you are absolutely free to not follow or watch this one. Okay. Um, what inspired this was watching news coverage. And a lot of times when people say I'm watching news coverage, what happens is they're watching one news outlet. I'm a journalism student. That was my major for 4 years in college. And so I know a lot of the basics about journalism ethics and how to vet sources and stuff like that. And I find myself doing that in my regular life. And so whenever I get a piece of media, I do cross check it and double check it against other outlets with different levels of bias and things along those lines. Normally, if I was on YouTube or if I was a high level YouTuber, this would be I would pitch to Ground News or something along those lines. Services that try their best to remove the bias in news sources. But since this is a small channel, I am not there yet. Okay. Um, Here's what's happening. And I'm seeing people on message boards and in news message boards specifically argue this. Um, Essentially, we are purging this country is purging immigrants, and they're finding excuses to purge people that come from other countries. Initially, it was under the veneer of law enforcement action. They're finding people that have broken the law, but now they're just scouring social media and cross-checking it against student visas, and seeing how many people they can cancel and expel their visa. So real quick call to action. If you have a student visa, you need to go purge your social media to the best of your ability. Now, I know that there's Wayback Machines. I know they can pull old records and stuff, but you need to clean up your social media. That's an easy one. That's a low hanging fruit that you guys can do. It may not offer you protection, but if you are in that class of people that are working that have some kind of visa, they're using social media records to determine who gets to stay and who gets to go. And eventually, once they get through with that, finding social media as a justification, they'll move on to another justification because it feels like the tone and tenor is we don't want immigrants here. And it's kind of a sad state of affairs, but that's what's happening right now. So they're going through and kind of manufacturing reasons to expel students on student visas. Not a great place to be. And the argument I'm seeing, and I've done my fact checking on this, like I said, the argument I'm seeing specifically is, um, well, visa holders have conditional access to parts of the Constitution, which is true. There's limits and conditions on it, but the specific things are coming after the students on student visas for is things that aren't restricted by being a visa holder, and so we're going to get into that too. Okay. But understand this isn't paranoia. We're looking at pattern recognition, and it's not to incite a mass panic or anything along those lines, but it's just seeing what's actually happening. Um, and I'm expanding it. So right now we're seeing they're kind of testing out what they can do with civil liberties. And this is not a new test. This has been going on for a while. But right now it's kind of targeting communities where it's really easy to it's easier because there's not a lot of defense, which is going to be immigrant communities, which is going to be kids or students on student visas. I don't want to say kids because that's not always the case. Okay. So you have, and I'll give you a couple. We know the Constitution. You have you have the right to First Amendment protections, freedom of speech, due process, Fourth Amendment, which is search and seizure. You have the right to remain silent, and right to counsel. Now, these are protections that are specifically extended to all visa holders. Okay. First Amendment, due process, Fourth Amendment, right to remain silent, and right to counsel. They have essentially removed, they suspended it feels like they suspended the First Amendment because they are going through people on student visas, social media accounts to figure out who they can expel, whose visa they can revoke. The due process one has been in the news. I'm not going to beat that one to death. Fourth Amendment against search and seizure, that's kind of tied to the due process thing. Right to remain silent and the right to counsel, and that's still tied to what's going on in the news. These protections extend to visa holders too. But the reality, and this is going to be more of an opinion, the laws only work if they're honored by the state. And when it's not, it becomes more of a social contract than an actual law. When the state doesn't observe your rights, it's a social contract at that point in time where they can actively decide, I'm going to ignore the social contract, thereby bypassing your rights, and moving on what we got to do. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. And I feel like it's kind of being beta tested on super, super vulnerable communities. But this is not a new beta test. This has been happening. And I'm going to get into what I mean by that. But the laws only work. They're only conceptual if they're not enforced across the board. So if we're saying that visa holders do have the right to First Amendment protections, due process, Fourth Amendment, right to remain silent, right to counsel, if we're saying that these things that aren't really constrained by the limitations on a visa holder's rights that actually do exist, now we're into, well, these are conditional. They're more concepts, they're more ideas. And so that's what we're rolling into. Okay. And I mentioned this, depending on what neighborhood you growing up in. Depending on what neighborhood you grow up in, you are more aware of this concept than other people. And I'll use my own personal thing. And there's plenty of stories about it. But let's be honest. So I've grown up in neighborhoods that have been over policed. And when I say over policed, there's literally nothing going on. You have police that are bored on their shifts. And when you have bored cops just kind of lingering, that's where you start seeing just kind of the manufacturing of offenses, just so that they can have something to do, so they can be active. And that's where you start getting into weird rights violations, where specifically, um, against search and seizure, against unlawful detention, you start seeing these because a lot of times when communities are over policed, there's nothing for the officers to do there. Specifically, and I see people popping on and popping off. This stream ain't for everybody. I'm just being honest with you. And so In those communities where you're dealing with over policing, you have police officers that have nothing to do. And that's when they start messing with citizens who are minding their own business, asking questions, poking around. Hey, what you up to? Checking in, that kind of stuff that you see. And that's where you start getting into those weird rights violations where they start searching people on suspicion that's not really valid just because they don't have anything better to do, you know, talking, stopping people and asking, "What are you up to? Where are you going?" That kind of stuff that normally leads to a negative encounter with law enforcement. And so when I say that, I'm saying this: if you grew up in a neighborhood that is over policed or was over policed, you have intimate knowledge that a lot of times you are willing to trade away chunks of your rights just so that you can go home, just so you can make it back to the house. So you'll let them frisk you or interrogate you or do whatever just so that they can leave you alone. Case in point. So when I was in college, um I still lived at home because the campus wasn't that far from my house. Okay. And so leaving had to be the library because the library at the university closed around 11. And so leaving the library, out on and if you're in Omaha, you're gonna know what I'm talking about. If you're not from Omaha, then just bear with me. I'm out on Leavenworth Street. I had to get some gas on the way back from the university, on the way back to the house. Um, I get pulled over. Now, what happened was I'm driving down Leavenworth and I see headlights in my rearview mirror, and the headlights get smaller and smaller, and I see that they're right on my bumper. And so I speed up just a little bit. Boom, side lights come on. I'm getting pulled over by a cop. Okay. So I'm in this police traffic stop. Um, I hadn't done anything. I had, at the end of the day, I didn't even get any citation or anything. I hadn't done anything. Only thing I did was speed up so I didn't get rear-ended by this cop that was on my bumper. And we're having the normal police pullover interaction thing. And again, I'm aware of what my rights are, but it's late at night and I'm in the car by myself. There's no lawyer standing next to me. And so the only way I can fix this is if I have some kind of lawyer or legal representation, but I didn't have any of that stuff. And so piece by piece, I'll go through the rights I had to give up. And so sitting there in this police stop, given my license, they go run my license. Okay. And then the officer comes back and accuses me of having a fake license. What happened was, and for those that know me, my name is Brian. It's not spelled in a traditional way. It's Bryon. What happened was the officer transposed the Y and the R when they were running my stuff. And since it didn't return a result or a result that didn't look like me, they thought I had a fake license. So now I'm getting accused of having a fake license. I am completely and utterly befuddled by this whole thing. And now we're going to start the search. Now I had a right, can we search your car? I don't consent to this search. They went ahead and did it anyway. And they pulled all of my stuff out of my car. They pulled my book bag out of my car, um, rifled through all of the stuff in my car. And most of it was college materials, books, syllabi, um, outlines, notebooks, the whole nine. And they were just pulling stuff out, dumping it onto the street, literally dumping my stuff onto the street. All my books that I had just paid $1,000 for, tossed into the street. They, of course, found nothing. Um, I told him I wanted, when I got all said and done, I said, I'm going to take this up with the watch commander. And I happen to know the watch commander's name. And they said, okay. And they said, well, I got to go and get my card, which hindsight being 2020, I was like 18, 19 years old. I should have known it was bullshit. I'll go get my card and I'll be right back. They go back to their car after they rifled my car, did a search I did not consent to. They tore apart my car, dumped $1,000 worth of books and college and study materials all over a busy street in Omaha. And when I asked and I said, I need your badge number so I can take it up with the shift commander or whatever. He said, okay. They went back to their car, slammed the door, and sped off like thieves in the night. And I'm sitting there in the middle of Leavenworth Street at around 11 o'clock at night, trying to get all my books and all my other materials out of the street. Now, I know those new videos where you got your First Amendment auditors and they sit there and challenge the cop and all that other stuff. I was a 19-year-old kid. And I didn't this was not a time where I had a camera on me. I didn't have, you didn't have a camera in your pocket. This is before the age of smartphones. And so multiple rights were violated that night. And I realized at that point, I knew this before, but this was the real kind of shining example that these rights are just conditions. Like, it's conditional. If the power of the authority that is against you doesn't want to honor those rights, you don't really have much of a recourse until you get to court. And more times than not, they just know that these things aren't going to go to court. And I didn't have the resources to take it to court. I just kind of sat there and endured it. So that's my story. And that's the story behind it. And so I know this stuff is conditional. I know these rights are conditional. And so I'm saying all that to say this. I feel like we're beta testing this idea of which rights apply to which citizens, and then we're actively removing them. And since it's a population that the populist candidate has consent for, people aren't really raising the alarms. Now, there's going to always be a segment of people that are pounding the table on behalf of these communities, but the powers that be absolutely do not care. Okay, so here's what I'm saying. One of the things when we're talking about Black people specifically, one of the things we need to be aware of, cognizant of, is in most of the major cities where you have a sizable Black population, they're within 100 miles of the border. If you look at it, they're 100 miles of a border. Okay. People aren't going to like this one. There's a lot in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of metropolitan public hospitals got shuttered. And so if you're a Black person over a certain age and you do not have physical copies of your current birth records, it may be very difficult to find physical copies of your birth records, because that raft of hospitals and public hospitals that got shuttered in major cities, they didn't do record retention, and they sure as hell didn't have computers. And so there's a certain population that's close to my age that if you were born in one of these metropolitan areas and one of these hospitals that don't exist anymore, that got shuttered in the 80s, you can have a very difficult time obtaining your birth records. And there's something that ties to this, so bear with me, okay? I'm using myself as an example. When I got married, my wife and I got one of the gifts was we had a trip to the Bahamas. Okay. We did not have time to gain passports. And at the time, you didn't necessarily need a passport to travel to the Bahamas, but you needed like a birth certificate or something, which I thought was easy to find. Well, I couldn't find my birth certificate. And if you're in Nebraska, or if you're not in Nebraska, Omaha is the biggest city in Nebraska by far. It's not even close. I thought that I could just go downtown and go to the records office and get my birth certificate. And what happened was, since I was adopted, this kicked off this multi-week odyssey of having to call and check and all this other stuff. Because I was adopted, it was a whole nother secondary process that I had to go through just to obtain a copy of my birth certificate. And it culminated with me having to drive 55 miles to another city and physically walk in to get my birth certificate. Now, had I not had a car or resources to go get it, I wouldn't have been able to access that stuff, and I would have been screwed. Okay. So I'm saying that to say this. We talk about how they are beta testing removal of rights with vulnerable populations. Okay. For those that don't know, within 100 miles of the border, Border Patrol, Customs have expanded rights, and people who live within those areas have abridged rights. Okay. And so if we're moving to a point where ICE and customs and stuff like can just stop people that they suspect of not being American enough, it's only a matter of time before you start seeing people get jammed up, black folks specifically, but just in general, people get jammed up on weird immigration holds and stuff because they don't have direct access to these birth records. I don't carry my birth certificate around with me. And if due process is not applied, there's no mechanism to check or verify whether my ID is sufficient. We need to be cognizant of what's happening here, y'all. And we need to be sounding alarms at every single step of the way. Okay. Um, the red tape I had to go through just to get something as simple as a copy of my birth certificate was ridiculous. And I happen to live in a state where the hospital where I was born is still standing. And I still had to go through all this stuff. Imagine if you were born in a hospital that no longer exists and you mess around and lose your birth certificate. And depending on what your state laws are, there may be a whole nother system for you. Because of course, when I was adopted, there was a name change and a whole group of other things. I still don't even know what my birth name would have been. But because there was a name change and all kinds of other stuff, I had to go through a whole nother layer. If you are in a hospital, if you were born in a hospital that no longer exists, it's hard to verify exactly trace where you were born and trace where those records are. So again, if you live in one of these cities that's with 100 miles of a border, you already have abridged rights in terms of your rights are already abridged in terms of search and seizure. And essentially what I'm saying is and I don't like slippery slope arguments, but if it devolves the way that it can, you're going to be in that Johannesburg kind of South Africa, show me your papers, boy, kind of stuff. And so the call to action for that is get your birth records in order, get this stuff so you can have easy access to it, or have it stored in your home so somebody that you know or love can have easy access to it. It may not make a difference. What we're seeing now, and there's a couple of things regarding prisoner exchange, and I have an outline that I'm supposed to be going down. So it is what it is. Pop over to the comments. Nobody's watching this. Nobody's watching this. Okay. This is the quiet part out loud. And this is kind of the direction I'm seeing things go. This administration doesn't shot fake too much. They telegraph a lot of the stuff that they have planned. The quiet part out loud's already been said. They're fine with finding a way to send American prisoners to private prisons overseas. They're testing it out with the immigrant population, but they've already said that the contracts are signed and they can send American prisoners to these offshores prisons that aren't under the jurisdiction of United States courts. And if you ever known anybody that's in jail, I used to work with juveniles, and it was a similar thing. If you know anybody that's in jail, you got family that's locked up for whatever reason, they made a mistake, they didn't make a mistake, they got caught up in the wrong situation, or they were completely wrong. Prisoner shuffling is a reality. It's already common in the jail industry to shuffle prisoners randomly from one spot to another. I don't think that is too much of a stretch of imagination that they can throw one of these private offshore prisons in the mix, and now we're having American prisoners shuffled off to offshore prisons. And I wouldn't be surprised if it hasn't happened already and we just haven't heard about it. Okay. And a lot of times you think it can't affect you until it does. When I think back on how the prison system works and stuff, and how wrongfully people can get sucked into it, look at Kalief Browder. And I'm pulling up the details here so I can get him right. But I wrote a piece on him that never got published, and I can't find it now. But Khalif Browder was a young man who got falsely accused of stealing a book bag, and he was held at 16 years old, I believe. Um, 16 years old, was held in Rikers Island. And for those that don't know, Rikers Island in New York is where you go pre-trial. They haven't even determined if you're guilty or anything. They just hold you in Rikers Island until you go to court. Okay. He was held in Rikers Island without trial for 3 years for stealing a backpack that had found out that he didn't steal. Little kid. He's like 15 years old. He's kept in solitary confinement for 800 days. A child kept in solitary confinement on Rikers Island for 800 days. And he's not with us anymore because the mental strain and stress of being detained in a place like that absolutely created mental health crises that he couldn't deal with. But he's not with us anymore. He hanged himself when he was 22 years old. Um, Regular people can absolutely get pulled into the justice system, and it should terrify us that um, it can happen that quickly. All you need to be is on a pretrial hold, and then they do a prisoner shuffle, and next thing you know, you are on a boat somewhere or on a plane somewhere. And so we need to be aware of how this is. We could determine, I don't know who said it, but we can kind of determine how civil a society is by how we treat our prisoners. And right now, we're sending them off to one of the most brutal prisons in the world. We have a partnership, an active working partnership with them. I have a young man from my case management days, um, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but a long story short, he's placed in a youth detention facility. And if you ran away from the youth detention facility, what happened was they'd come in and they would charge you with felony escape so that they could hold you in the county jail until, until you could until you agree to go back to the youth center. Well, somebody had told this young man that if you don't agree to go back to the youth center, then they got to release you, which wasn't the case. At a 15-year-old who spent an entire summer, and essentially he was in admin and segregation because he's 15 years old in the county jail. He spent an entire summer in solitary confinement. And despite the efforts of myself, despite the efforts of the judge on the case, despite the efforts of the county attorney, we could not get this kid out. I had to go up there and sit with him, play cards with him. I traveled 4 hours to go sit with him and play cards with him and engage him and keep him entertained. And I couldn't do that every week. I could do it once a month. He sat in solitary confinement for 3 to 4 months at 15 years old. He's not with us anymore too. He's gone. He'd have been in his early 20s now. He's not with us anymore. The way the system is set up, it should terrify normal people about what's going on right now. Because small lapses can absolutely destroy people's lives. But then when you put systematic things in there, like adding foreign prisons into the rotation of private prisons you can use, it can absolutely destroy people's entire existence. Anyway, let's move on. So prisoner shuffling is common, and it happens because that is an unprotected class of people. And more times than not, people say, well, they're prisoners, they deserve whatever is coming to them. And we will rationalize and justify um, horrific stuff just because the prisoner is a prisoner. Okay. We talked about the 100-mile zone. Borders and customs agents have extended powers there. Um, the Constitution, parts of the Constitution are essentially suspended for you if you live in that 100-mile zone of a border. And what I'm saying is this: if you are black or brown or part of one of these marginalized communities and you are an American citizen, you need to probably try to secure active copies of your birth records and have physical copies of your birth records just in case. I can really easily see some black or brown person who just got back from traveling internationally get jammed up and be held on immigration hold. And since due process is suspended, essentially, you could be ferreted off, spirited away to one of these offsite jails. So just protect yourselves, okay? You don't have to be undocumented. You just got to be one of the inconvenient people. And when I say they're beta testing this, they beta test a lot of times when we talk about rights removal, they beta test it on a population or subgroup that uh, is easy to turn people against. And then they remove their rights. And then it starts to become one of this last hired, first fired thing for groups as they move up the social hierarchy. So just be aware of that. Okay. Right now, we're kind of in this era of manufacturer consent. And I do think that uh, our major news outlets are complicit in it. I'm not just talking about the right leaning where you can point at Fox or Newsmax and stuff like that. I'm talking about, you know, our major news outlets because there's not enough sounding the bell of how abnormal this stuff is for the expanded population. For specific communities, this is completely normal. And the reality is not enough people care about that. Not enough people care about the communities where this stuff, where um, the Bill of Rights is just a concept. We don't care enough about that. But right now, we're in this weird thing of manufacturing consent. Media outlets are creating public approval for these oppressive measures just by not addressing how abnormal this stuff is. Okay. And as this breaks down, laws end up becoming suggestions. And suggestions can be discarded if they're inconvenient for the people sitting in the seats of power. And now we're in this slippery slope kind of argument because as you start removing, and again, I'm gonna just tell you this is just me kind of freestyling right here. um I have my political science classes and stuff and all that other stuff. I fact check this to the best of my ability, but I am a human and I can get stuff wrong. But in my perspective, as we see this thing break down, laws end up becoming suggestions. And if it's inconvenient for the people in seats of power, those suggestions can easily get ignored. Okay. They already said that they're trying to find ways to sidestep birthright citizenship in the Fourth Amendment. It's been recorded. They've already said it. Okay. Our laws, essentially, when you remove the co-equal parts of government where you have your checks and balances, where the legislative can check the executive could, where you have the judiciary to check the executive and stuff like that. When that stuff starts getting ignored, the laws end up becoming a social contract. They're not laws anymore. If the executive can unilaterally ignore what the judicial branch says, you don't have laws anymore. You have a bunch of suggestions because there's no enforcement of it. Now, we have laws, but they don't. There's a difference. And if I need to explain the difference to you, you probably need to sit down and read a little bit about how fascism actually works. But right now, laws are a part of a social contract if they aren't if the whole society isn't held to those standards. And it's always been disproportionately enforced. But right now, we're actually seeing an executive office that doesn't isn't want to play the game of checks and balances. We want to do what we want to do when we want to do it, and nobody can stop us. Okay. Black folks have seen this before. And now I'm talking narrowly to us. I talked about living in over police neighborhoods. Okay. Due process and the Fourth Amendment depend on the temperament of the officer or judge you're currently dealing with. And it's a sad state of affairs. I can list, I went a whole story about getting pulled over and having my stuff rifled in a search I did not consent to. And then officer speeding off like a thief in the night when I asked for badge numbers and stuff. It can happen just like that. And I didn't fight it because I'm like, I just want to go home tonight. But like against search and seizures, that kind of stuff is truly dependent on who you're interacting with. Okay. We need to take basic preventative steps to verify citizenship and get your documents now. And remove all barriers because you never know when you are going to need proof that you are actually a citizen. You never know. And even if you don't, if it's never happens, fantastic, great. You still have your birth certificate and you still have your social security card. But if you do not have those items, you are putting yourself in an enhanced level of risk. Okay. And even at the end of the day, you may have all those documents since we're seeing the suspension of due process when it comes to immigrants. It may not even matter. Okay. I'm just being honest. It may not, at the end of the day, it may not even matter. Okay. I talked about the manufacturer consent. It comes from Noam Chomsky. Go just read Noam Chomsky. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. um, Public opinion is being shaped to justify eroding of civil liberties. We just need to be aware of that, and we need to call it out whenever it happens. And even if it's not a group that you care about or like, it's going to affect you some way or another if we don't stop this ball from rolling downhill. It always starts with the least protected class. The least protected class, we normalize the abuse of that class and then expand the reach. And it ends up becoming this last hire, first fired. And when it's normalized, nobody's safe. Right now, when we talk about you know, fatal police encounters, the largest demographic that happens to is white folks. But the news will have you believe that it's just black folks. It happens to us at a disproportionate rate to the population, but still the largest group of people that are killed by police are white folks, and so we should be sounding alarms. You would think that we would be sounding alarms at all levels, but since it's just attributed to a thing that black folks endure or go through, there's a segment of the population that does not care. Same thing when it comes to the disappearance of Native American women, um, the enhanced risk that black women are under when dealing with law enforcement, the enhanced risk black women have to deal with when it comes to childbirth. A lot of these things, since it's not happening to the correct population of people to care about, it just gets swept under the rug and people don't care about it. Okay. Back in the days, and we use the Foreign Enemies Act, like we're rolling out the Foreign Enemies Act. This is the same thing that justified Japanese internment, where they were just snatching up Japanese Americans and putting them into labor camps. We see it with McCarthyism. We saw it post 9/11 with profiling. And then they expanded it once they said, okay, we're fine with obviously brown skinned Muslims getting harassed by the cops. We're going to expand it, and now we have stop and frisk. You know, and now they're just police in New York specifically, but It was a national thing. I mean, I know we talk about the realm of stop and frisk in New York, but it was a national thing where um, New York police expanded it from um, having enhanced surveillance on Muslims to where they're just grabbing anybody that's brown off the street and groping them on no suspicion at all. Okay. So let's run this back from the top. Okay. This isn't a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy. It's a conversation. Right now, the government is abridging freedom of speech and it's starting with communities that they know cannot fight back. It's with visa holders. And for those that want to argue with me, I've double checked this, I triple checked this. I understand that visa holders do have a limited scope of rights under the law when it comes to the Constitution. I understand that. But the rights that are being removed right now aren't those limited rights. Search and seizure, freedom of speech, these things are not abridged at all for visa holders. But now they're scrubbing social media and cross-checking residents and cross-checking visa holders against their social media accounts to see who they can revoke and expel. They're purging this country of foreign-born citizens and immigrants. And I'm curious to see what the racial breakdown of this is, because I don't know yet. I have a feeling I'm not going to say it. We should be all concerned about this, even though it doesn't directly affect you. I know a lot of people that will beat their chest loudly about, the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment and all this other stuff, but will fall silent if they're seeing somebody who's part of a marginalized group having their rights actively removed by the state. And that is not okay. And it's a hypocrisy. They're coming for the communities they know won't fight back, and then it's going to be last hired, first fired, and they're going to start weeding out the undesirables. So actively, if you're on a student visa, and I am overestimating what my reach is, I know that. Hopefully this can reach your ears. If you are on a student visa or something along those lines, and you're in this position, you need to go through and clean up your social media accounts immediately, because the First Amendment is suspended for you. You have to protect yourself. And they're going to find another way, but at least don't give them that pathway. Okay. For visa holders, again, and I'm recapping here, because I'm wrapping this up. I'm recapping. For visa holders specifically, the laws that the protections that are unabridged for you is freedom of speech, due process, protection against unlawful search and seizure. You have the right to remain silent and the right to seek legal counsel. These rights apply to everybody on U.S. soil, including visa holders. Those areas I named are not abridged because you're a visa holder, but you have to protect yourself and scrub all records of you being involved with anything that they can find objectionable. I'm just saying. And it may already be too late, because a lot of these social media companies seem to be really fine with just turning over data to the government, even though they say they won't. They will. Okay. Visa status does not strip you of constitutional protections. I don't care what you say. I don't care what your MAGA uncle says. Visa status doesn't strip you of constitutional protections. The Constitution applies to people in this country. But on a visa, being on a visa status, it does amend which rights and how they can apply to you. Right now, we're seeing people getting their visas revoked. We're seeing medical students, student athletes. We're seeing a lot of other people who aren't part of the criminal element that they've kind of manufactured within the immigrant community and made it a broad brushstroke for all of immigrants. We're seeing them getting jammed up and deported too. Okay. Omaha has a huge Sudanese population. They should probably be terrified and finding ways to protect themselves. What does it say about a system that forgets its own rules? What do you say? Okay. In marginalized communities, rights were always just conceptual. It depends on what cop you're dealing with at the time. And a lot of it has to do with the nature of over policing. And I'm even removing the malice of the individual officers. I'm assuming that there's no malice. Just by having bored cops in your neighborhood, you're opening up the door for all kinds of First and Fourth Amendment violations. Okay, just being real. Um, it's not new. It's just becoming more visible, and now they're actually beta testing active removal of rights from immigrant populations. It will spread if we do not address it. We don't take a stand, it will spread. It's got to stop somewhere. Unless you're fine with it. And if you're fine with it, then you're probably somebody I don't necessarily need on my friends list. I'm keeping it buck. If you're fine with, we have conditional rights for different groups depending on what your immigration status is and stuff like that. If you're fine with having differential enforcement of the law depending on what somebody's nationality is, then we probably you don't really you're on you have the wrong friend on Facebook if you have me on your list. Okay. We talked about manufactured consent. I'm not going into the Noam Chomsky stuff. You can go read that yourself. Okay. Um, but public opinion is being shaped to justify eroding civil liberties. And it's being beta tested in communities that have no capacity to defend themselves. It's being beta tested. They're going to get into they're going to get into they're going to start rolling it out to other communities of American citizens because they've already said that they're trying to find ways to offshore American prisoners. It always starts with the least protected. They get the public to be fine with the abuse, and then they expand the reach. And nobody is safe. It becomes last hired, first fired when it comes to civil liberties. So they'll start reverse engineering who's the last person that got these specific rights, who's the last group that got these specific rights that we do not like. Let's find a way to get rid of them. Start with birthright citizenship and start working their way backwards. And we can see it as protections are rolling back for LGBTQ people. And I don't like the DEI argument. I'm not going to get into it because really, I understand what the intent was and what people think it is. A lot of times with the DEI stuff, it's just making a workplace more accessible to everybody, and it's been conflated with Black people are getting jobs that they should not have, which is not true. It's been reduced to women are getting jobs they should not have, which is not true. And realistically, the largest beneficiaries of DEI policies have been white women and veterans. Hiring veterans is a DEI policy. Making businesses accessible to people who have different handicaps. That's a DEI policy. Yes, it's the was it the ACA, not the Affordable Care Act. But basically, yes, there's other laws, but it's still kind of a DEI policy by making workplaces accessible and livable for people that have different needs. Okay. But as we start reverse engineering it, we start stripping away rights depending on when you got them. The most recent people to get specific rights are going to be the first ones that lose them. And we're going to see how far this goes back. Eventually it's going to get to somebody you care about, or maybe not. And like I said, if not is the case, then you probably shouldn't be on my friends list. Okay. we've already seen this play out. We've already seen how it works for groups that supposedly had the protection of the United States Constitution. We see it with Japanese internment camps. We saw it with McCarthyism. Saw it with racial profiling after 9/11. Okay. For my friends that care, the thing is, know your rights and try to teach other people what their rights are. Pay attention to patterns. Do basic maintenance to protect yourself. If you don't have access to birth records or things that prove you're a citizen of this country, and it sounds far-fetched, it sounds ridiculous, but if you don't have access to those physical copies of stuff, you probably need to do it because you never know. Okay. Only make sure you're sharing verified information. I'm doing my best. I fact check this. This is why it took so long to get to the live stream today. I verified this and double and triple and quadruple checked my sources on this. Okay. Of course, organize, speak up, you know, rely on each other for mutual aid, and look out for one another. But the idea is, y'all, they're beta testing what they can do. And you may not think that you land on the undesirable group of people who get swept up in this and jammed up in this until you do. And I just need you to be aware and cognizant of that, y'all. Okay? I just need you to be aware. That's all I'm asking. Protect yourself in the best way you know how to. I would take questions, but I don't think anybody's watching this. You know, I would take questions or whatnot, but like, I feel like I'm talking into the void. So, with that being said, again, I wasn't going to jump into the political thing. I did have some comic book stuff that I wanted to talk about, but this felt a little bit more important. I think long boxing while black or long boxing while black / blurting while dad is going to retain my political slant that I had present in my blog posts. Okay. So just be prepared for that. I know I do have friends that don't line up with me on the political spectrum, and I'm fine. I exist with your existence, exist with mine. Exist with your viewpoints, exist with mine. If you come to my feed with the other viewpoint, I'm going to respond. And if it comes across my timeline, I'm going to respond. Just be aware of that. I don't like saying it's only politics, but because specifically for black people, your existence is politicized. You existing can be a political statement. You existing in a specific place can be a political statement. Okay? That's just real. And so it is a wild thing. But that's what I got, y'all. I'm kind of drained. That talk about Khalif Browder and my kid Dalen really took it out of me because the kid specifically I had on my caseload that haunts me of how badly he was failed at every level by this system, and he's not with us anymore. And it bothers me. I have nightmares about that. It's still one of those things, and it happened over 10 years ago. Still a really hard time with that one, as you can tell. And he's not the first kid I've lost. That was one of the kids I case managed. He's not the first one. He's one of two that sticks with me because of how massively he was failed by a system that was set up to protect him, supposedly. The moral of the story is, boys and girls, you're going to have to do the basic maintenance to protect yourself. Okay. And it doesn't apply to you until it does. And then when it does, if you have not taken the basic steps to shelter and insulate yourself from this, um, you might end up in a bad place. So that's all I got. I didn't want to make this heavy handed or over the top. Like I said, probably going to clip this into an episode and we'll see where it goes. I will talk to y'all later. Blurting while Long Boxing While Black presents Blurting While Dead. I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.